They kept the heir, they sent her instead. Freya Arden had known this the moment her father called her into his study, 3 days before the treaty deadline. Her sister, Mara, stood in the corridor outside, too important to sacrifice. The heir of Arden, the councils said, Freya was not valuable. That had been made clear her entire life. So when the carriage stopped at the gates of Blackthorn in a cold autumn rain, she stepped out alone. No escort, no mother, no parting words from her father, except a document she had not been allowed to read until that morning. The treaty required one daughter of Alpha bloodline Arden to marry the King of Blackthorn before the next moon's peak. It said nothing about which daughter. Her father had found the loophole. Blackthorn rose against the sky, like something that had grown rather than been built. Towers of black stone, wrapped in dead vines, a fortress that did not welcome but endured. The people at the gates moved quickly, heads low. None of them looked up at the tallest tower to the north. Freya noticed that immediately. No one looked at the north tower. A woman in severe gray wool was waiting inside the arch. She introduced herself as Lady Isolde without warmth, without a smile, without the smallest pretense of pleasure at the meeting. She was perhaps 60, silver-haired, with eyes that assessed Freya the way a merchant assesses grain, for use, not for worth. "You are not the eldest," Isolde said. "No," Freya agreed. Something shifted in those pale eyes, not approval, calculation completing itself. The treaty holds regardless of birth order. She turned without waiting for a response. Freya followed, carrying her own bag, because no one had thought to take it. The rules were delivered in the flat tone of someone reciting fire safety protocol. No feast, no celebration. Do not touch the mask. Do not approach the North Tower after dusk. Do not remain in the king's presence when the moon is high. Do not ask about the women who came before you. Freya listened to all of it. She had learned long ago that rules delivered without explanation were usually designed to protect the person giving them, not the person receiving them. Her attendant arrived an hour before the ceremony. The girl introduced herself as Leora, young, maybe 19, with careful eyes and hands that were competent and kind. When she pinned the last clasp of the gray ceremonial gown at Freya's throat, she paused. "My lady, my sister worked in the North Tower 3 years ago." Freya met her eyes in the mirror. Where is she now? Leora didn't answer that. She stepped back and smoothed the front of the gown instead. "You should know," she said quietly, "that he refused the last 2 before you arrived. Sent them home. Or Jill, that is what the council was told." The sentence ended in a particular way, not a statement, not quite a question, a door left open. "Thank you," Freya said, and then she sat on the edge of the bed and thought about a wolf she had found in a trap when she was 17. She thought about the way it had looked at her. Black eyes, enormous, wild with pain, and something underneath the pain that was almost dignity. She had cut the silver wire with the small knife her mother had given her. She had pulled 3 barbs from the wolf's foreleg, cleaned the wounds, packed them with herbs from her satchel. The wolf had held still the entire time. It had not snapped, it had not snarled. She had stayed the night because the bleeding was slow to stop. She had called it Ash because of the dust on its black coat. In the morning, before it disappeared into the trees, it had placed its enormous head in her open palm. For a single, brief, unbearable moment. She had thought about that moment more often than she would ever admit. Then a knock came at the door, and a servant told her it was time. The great hall was lit by torchlight and nothing warmer. The people assembled were council members, not guests. They stood in formal rows with the fixed expressions of people witnessing a legal transaction. There were no flowers, there was no music, and then there was the king. He was taller than she expected, dressed entirely in black, moving with the particular economy of someone who had long since learned that every action carried weight. The mask was the second thing she noticed, silver and black, shaped to cover everything above his jaw, fitted so precisely it might have been a second skin. The metal was worked in a pattern between thorns and veins, or perhaps the branching of cracks in old ice. His eyes showed behind it, dark and completely still. She kept her own face neutral. She was very good at that. A commotion broke out near the western wall before the ceremony could begin. One of the king's own guards staggering, pressing both hands to his head, a sound rising from his throat that was deeply wrong. The torches seemed to flicker. Several people stepped back. The king's voice cut across the noise. Chain him below, use silver if he resists. Cold, precisely delivered, the voice of a man for whom mercy was not a reflex. 4 guards moved immediately. The afflicted man was removed from the hall in under a minute. Freya watched the king's face, the part of it she could see, and saw nothing move. She thought the rumors were true. She thought my father knew exactly what he was doing. The next morning, Garrick found her in the corridor and said, unprompted, "The guard from the ceremony is in the lower healing ward. The chains were to keep him from tearing his own throat open during the shift." She absorbed that. The ceremony itself was brief. She walked the required steps. She answered the required words. The priest reached the part about the mate mark, the bond that would seal the treaty in blood as well as ink, and the king said quietly, "No." The priest blinked. "Your Grace, the bond. The marriage fulfills the treaty. It will take nothing else from her." Silence followed, not the comfortable kind. Freya looked at the man beside her and could not decide whether that sentence was the cruelest thing she had heard today or the strangest form of kindness she had ever been offered. After the signing, the witnesses dispersed. Isolde glided away. Garrick, a broad-shouldered man with the face of someone who chose what to show very deliberately, positioned himself near the door. The king moved toward the corridor that led to the north tower. "You knew I was not the eldest," she said. He stopped. He turned, and she saw his eyes in the torchlight, tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. "Your family kept the heir and sent the daughter they could afford to lose." It was exactly the truth, no softening. She found that she preferred that to anything else he might have offered. "Then we understand each other," she said. "Go to your room, Freya Arden." He walked away. She let him go because this was the first day, and she was already thinking. She was lying on her back, staring at the ceiling when she heard it. Not a sound exactly, but a pressure in the air. She went out. She crossed the courtyard because she was a healer, and the sounds she'd heard were the sounds of something in pain. The tower door was unlocked. Inside, a man on the floor, caught mid-shift, the body between forms the mask's pattern, glowing with a sickly, wrong light. The king, on his knees, one hand braced against the stone. When she stepped inside, his head came up. "Leave," he said. The word was rougher than it had been an hour ago. "You're in pain," she said. "I said leave." She was already looking at his hands. The right one was shaking. His coat was pushed up at the side, and where his shirt had ridden up, she could see skin. She could see a scar. It ran from just below his ribs in a diagonal line toward his hip. Old and silver pale, the kind of scar left by silver-threaded wire pulled through skin, the kind of pattern left by a trap, by 3 barbs removed one at a time with a small knife, while the animal beneath them held very, very still. Her entire body went quiet. She heard herself say, "Ash." The wolf stopped moving. The king lifted his head. His eyes, behind the mask, were the same black as the wolf's had been. The same quality in them, the same exhaustion, the same careful, terrible intelligence. "You should not know that name," he said. She stared at him. He stared at her. The night settled around them both, and Freya understood that everything was about to change. By morning she had made herself a list, confirm what she had seen, say nothing until she understood it, find out what the mask actually was. Garrick appeared at breakfast, watching her the way a guard watches a door. "He didn't hurt you," he said. Not a question. No. He asked for 3 things when he agreed to this treaty: a small wedding, a separate room, and someone who would not scream. None of the previous women held to those terms? Garrick said nothing, which was its own answer. She spent the morning in the library. The books on wolf magic were deliberately disordered. She found 3 useful texts, nothing specific on silver-black masks, only one passing reference to seal bonds that stopped well short of useful. Leora found her at noon. "They're saying you were in the tower last night. Lady Isolde is saying it." "Tell me more about your sister," Freya said. Senna had taken a post in the North Tower 2 years before Freya arrived. She had sent 1 letter. "The work is strange, but I am learning, and please don't worry." She had not sent another. The household records listed her as having died of a fever. Her body had never been permitted to be seen. "There are others," Leora said, "names in the household ledgers that simply stop. I need you to help me find them." "I have been waiting 2 years for someone to say that." The king came to find her in the herb garden that afternoon. He stopped at the gate and did not enter. "You should have left this morning. I am offering you the means to dissolve the treaty." "Tell me what the mask is, not what Isolde told you, what you know from experience." Something moved across the lower half of his face, not discomfort, recognition. It controls the shift, or it was supposed to. Isolde made it after my parents died. She said the curse in my bloodline would drive me into the wolf and never let me back. Did she say that before or after you started wearing it? He was very still. Before, she said she could see it coming in my father, that the mask would let me rule without becoming a danger. And without it, I'm worse. The record bears that out. Whose record? He looked at her. She held the look. The wolf I treated 7 years ago lay still for 2 hours while I pulled silver from its leg. It could have killed me without effort. It chose not to. That is not the behavior of something without control. "That was before the mask," he said. "Yes," she said. "That's what I'm asking you to consider." He left without answering, but he closed the gate carefully, and he did not tell her again to leave. 3 days passed. She learned the castle's rhythms, which servants would answer questions, and which went careful and flat at certain subjects. She learned that Alaric, Isolde's son, pleasant, observant, too smooth in all the right ways, had been briefing his mother on Freya's movements from the beginning. On the second evening, 7 people arrived at the castle gates with the gray-tinted skin and shaking hands of silver fever in a middle stage. Evander appeared from the direction of the North Tower. When the council representative began to explain, he interrupted. "Open the east stores. Your Grace, the cost. Open them." Freya was already moving toward the nearest sick wolf. Later, after the fever patients had been settled, she sat down in the corridor and found that Evander was sitting on the floor outside the largest room, his back to the wall, eyes open. He was still there at dawn. She sat beside him without speaking. Some people had never been allowed to simply sit next to another person without something being required of them. "My parents died of silver fever," he said quietly. She did not offer the words people said reflexively. "Then you know what it looks like when it turns." "Yes, they'll make it through. The eldest is stubborn. The young man in the far room needs 3 more days." After a while, he turned to look at her. "The wolf remembers you," he said. Her breath moved differently. She kept her face still. "Does the man?" she asked. He didn't answer, but he didn't look away. They were pulled together by the ordinary business of the border treaty. Reports, a dispute over winter road maintenance, 3 Arden merchants who had refused local taxes. She had grown up watching her father dismiss these problems as minor irritants. Watching Evander work through them, she found that he treated each one with the attention of a man who understood that every small injustice was made of real people. She said so one afternoon. "You don't have to look surprised," he said, not looking up from the document. "I'm not surprised. I'm reassessing." He did look up then. She met the look steadily. They were becoming something else, slowly, honestly, without either of them entirely meaning to. Trouble came the way it always does, not announced, but accumulating. Leora found her a maid who had once worked in the North Tower, and that woman knew another woman. And eventually Freya was sitting in the lower records room across from a person who had been listed in the household documents as dead. Her name had been Theodan. She was perhaps 40, and she did not look up until Freya stopped asking questions and simply waited. Theodan had been one of Evander's proposed betrothals 4 years ago. He had attempted the mate mark. She had watched it go black. She had watched his face when it happened, watched him tear the mark from his own neck, as though his body had made the decision before his mind could follow. She had woken up 3 days north of Blackthorn in a cart with a note in her pocket that said only, "Stay gone." "He did not know I was alive," Theodan said. "I believe that. I watched from a distance." Freya pressed her hands flat on the table. "The mark went black. What caused it? The bite or the mask?" "The mask," she said. "I had a rune reader examine my scar. The silver traces were external, introduced. The room was very quiet." "I need you to come with me," Freya said. She brought Theodan to Garrick and laid it out. The mask's behavior pattern. The ring Theodan had seen Isolde use before each incident. The correspondence from the household records. Garrick listened without interrupting. "If you're right, the mask is not protecting him." "The mask is being used against him," Freya said. "The curse is not in the bloodline. It was put into the mechanism supposed to treat it." "He will not believe this. He has built everything on the belief that he is the source of the danger." "I know, I'm not asking you to convince him today. I'm asking you to help me find the rest of the evidence before someone else moves first." The storage room, level 3, East Corridor, after dark, bring Leora. In the documents alongside the schematics, Freya found a series of letters. Most were logistical, materials, payments, timelines. One was not. It was written in Isolde's hand, addressed to the craftsman, and it said, "This bloodline destroyed my family. His father was ungovernable before the fever took him. The boy will be the same. I am not doing this to harm him. I am doing this because he cannot be allowed to rule without a check, and no one else has the will to provide one." Freya read it twice. Then she said it with the schematics. Not simple ambition, something worse, a woman who had made herself the architect of someone else's entire self-perception and believed she was right to do it. 3 mechanisms. The first was suppression. The mask drew from the wolf's native energy and destabilized it. The wolf was not escaping control. It was being made unstable and then blamed for the instability. The second was the control interface, a paired ring. What the ring directed, the mask carried out: pain, forced shift, amplified aggression. The third was the poison, silver-threaded channels built into the bite points of the mask. If Evander marked someone while wearing it, the silver would travel through the mate bond into the person receiving it. Depending on dosage, it could weaken or kill. A final notation, written in a different hand than the rest, warned that the mechanisms had to be severed in reverse order, or the feedback would kill the wearer. It also described what happened when the royal binding was removed. While the wearer was in full wolf form, the central binding seam would separate briefly from the wolf's body, visible, accessible, before sealing again. Any clean iron blade could cut it in that window. Silver would not work. The craftsman had tested it. Theodan's mark had gone black because she had been poisoned. Evander had thought himself a monster. He had been the weapon pointed at someone else. She sat back on her heels and let the full weight of it settle. A decade at minimum of a man building his entire life around a lie about his own nature. Garrick was already reading ahead. The ring first, then the royal binding, then the mask in wolf form. And they have to be broken in that order. The notation was clear. Reverse the sequence, and the feedback kills the wearer. The royal binding is connected to pack authority. To sever it, he would have to transfer pack authority, she said, to you. The silence that followed was very long. That could be interpreted as abdication, Garrick said. He may not be able to recover the authority afterward. I know. And then the mask has to be destroyed while he's in full wolf form. If he's in human form, the feedback is lethal, so he has to be in wolf form, and he has to maintain enough awareness to not attack whoever destroys it. There is one more problem, she said. The ring is currently on Isolde's hand. Yes. They left the storage room in silence. The conversation with Evander did not go the way she had planned. She brought Theodan to the private meeting room in the East Wing and laid out the evidence in order. The design documents, Theodan's account, the correspondence about the ring. Evander listened. When she finished, he said, "No, not angry, not explosive, just closed. Isolde has records," he said. She documented my instability before the mask. She documented what happened to people around me. Who created those records? Silence. She raised me, he said. After my parents, she was the only person. He stopped. I am not asking you to believe me today. I'm asking you to consider that your experience of yourself before the mask may not match what you were told about it. And to be prepared, because Isolde will move before we are ready. He looked at Theodan. "You are alive," he said. The words came out like something he had carried for a long time and was not certain he was allowed to put down. "I am," Theodan said. "And you tore the mark from yourself the moment you saw what it was doing. You were not lucid, but the wolf knew." He went to the window and stood with his back to the room. "Leave me." Everyone left. Freya was last. "Whatever you were before she put that on you, it was not what she told you it was. I have 7 years of personal memory, and a wolf that held still in a trap, while a stranger took silver from its leg. That is not what monsters do." She closed the door quietly. She made her mistake the following afternoon. She told herself she only wanted to confirm one detail in the documents. She told herself Garrick was busy. She told herself she had been in the North Tower before. She told herself that Ash knew her, and therefore she was safe. The tower room was empty. She found what she needed, turned to go, and the mask's lines lit up without warning. Isolde was not in the room, but the ring worked at a distance. Freya ran. She almost made it to the landing before Leora appeared on the stairs, pulling her out as the light from the mask flickered through the gap. The energy from the mask lashed through the doorway as it slammed, catching Leora's forearm, shallow but burning. She made a small noise but did not let go. In the corridor below, Leora showed her the mark along her forearm, shallow but real. "I thought being known meant being safe," Freya said. "Those aren't the same thing." "No," Leora said, "they're not." Isolde now knew exactly what Freya was to Evander. She had given her a reason to move tonight. The answer to how much time they had left was 1 day. On the following evening, Isolde called for an emergency council session. Its contents moved through the castle quickly. The king was no longer able to govern safely. A vote before the moon rose, regency for Alaric pending the king's removal. Freya found Garrick in the training yard. "She knows we found something." Or Alaric told her. She thought of Alaric, too smooth in all the right ways, who had mentioned twice that week that the treaty would survive dissolution if she chose it, who had let slip something about the storage room he should not have known, who had delivered the order to detain Leora bearing his own seal, dated so late it could not have been executed, as though the timing had been chosen rather than missed. "He has always known more than he pretends," Garrick said. "The question is where he lands when it counts." "He was in the North Tower." She climbed without waiting. "You've heard," she said. "Yes. Then you know what tonight is. An end one way or another." She laid it out plainly. The ring first, the authority transfer, the wolf last, the feedback risk if he was in human form, the possible irreversibility. He was quiet throughout. "You're asking me to publicly dismantle everything I've built, based on evidence contradicting what I've believed about my own nature for over a decade. Tonight." "Yes," he turned to look at her. "Why would you be here for this? You have no obligation." "Don't," she said quietly, with the same firmness she used when she needed a wound to stop being touched. "I am here because it is right to be here. That is enough." He looked at her for a long time. "The wolf," he said, "has wanted to go back to that forest for 7 years. She absorbed this carefully." "And the man?" she asked. He reached out slowly, with the particular care of someone who had learned that reaching for things tended to break them, and touched the back of her hand with 2 fingers. Not a hold, just contact. "The man," he said, is very glad you were the one they sent." She turned her hand over. She held his fingers briefly. Then she let go, because the moon would rise in 4 hours, and there was too much yet to do. "Then trust me," she said, "and let's go." The original treaty marriage was annulled by mutual consent before either of them spoke about what came next. A single document, signed by both, witnessed by Garrick. Freya set the pen down and did not feel loss. She felt the particular clarity of a door closing so that a different one could open. The council chamber was full. 12 Alpha representatives, treaty observers from the border regions. Isolde at the end of the table, wearing the silver-black ring and an expression of sorrowful resolve. Alaric at her right, not quite meeting anyone's eyes. Freya entered with Evander and looked at Alaric. His face was arranged carefully. What she saw in it, the slight tension around the mouth, the quality of his eyes, was a man who had made a decision he was not certain he could live with. She held his gaze for 2 seconds, then she looked away. Isolde laid out the case efficiently. The incidents, the failed betrothals, the burden of a king who could not control his wolf. The council members were nodding in the way people nod when they have been prepared to nod. "I propose that King Evander be temporarily removed from active governance, with Prince Alaric to serve in regency." Freya stepped forward. "My name is Freya Arden, treaty bride of this king and a healer by training. I request permission to present evidence before any vote is taken." One of the council members, an older man from the Northern Territory, the kind who had survived decades of politics by outlasting everyone else, said, "Grant it." She had the design schematics spread on the table. Garrick's hand was steady on the parchment. Theodan stood at the doorway. Leora held the second entrance. She got through the first piece when Isolde moved. The ring flashed. The mask on Evander's face lit up with the same cold wrongness she had seen in the tower on the first night. A sound came from his throat. Several council members stood. 2 guards reached for weapons. Isolde's voice, quiet and certain. "You see, this is why it cannot wait." The black lines spread down Evander's throat. His hands braced on the table's edge. Freya did not move toward him. She turned to Alaric. "Alaric," she said. He looked at her. "You left the storage room unlocked. You delayed the order to detain Leora. You let me find what I needed, because you already knew what the mask was." She paused. "If you believe your mother has gone too far, this is the moment to act on that belief. Not because it saves you from what you've helped her do. It won't, but because you are the only person in this room who can reach her right now." The chamber was loud. Voices, the sound of Evander's labored breath, someone calling for the guards. Alaric's face changed. He reached across the table and took his mother's hand. She turned to him with the absolute certainty of a woman who had never expected opposition from that direction. He uncurled her fingers. He lifted the ring from her hand. The silence in the room was enormous. Isolde said his name, just his name. With the weight of someone calling in a debt they are certain has not expired. "I'm sorry, Mother," he said, and then, louder, to the room. "The ring is a control mechanism for the mask. She had it made by the same craftsman. I helped transport the materials. I can confirm everything in those documents." The glow in the mask began to fade. Evander's breathing steadied. Freya met Evander's eyes and held up 3 fingers, the signal they had agreed on. He nodded. "The second thing required is more difficult," she said. Evander straightened. He looked at the council, all of them, the ones who had been afraid of him for years. "There is a binding in the mask connected to pack authority," he said. "Breaking it requires that binding to be severed first. The only way to sever it is to transfer pack authority." The room erupted. Garrick's voice cut through it. "To me, temporarily and voluntarily, on record." A council member said, "This could be interpreted as—" "I know what it can be interpreted as," Evander said. "I may not recover it afterward. I have been fully advised." He looked at Garrick. "You have served this pack for 12 years with your own judgment. If this fails, I can think of no one. I would rather have hold it." Garrick's jaw moved once. "I accept." The transfer was spoken aloud, witnessed by 12 council members, recorded by the treaty observer. When it was complete, the light in the mask shifted. Something changed in the quality of the air around Evander. The pack's authority redistributed into other hands. "The third mechanism," Freya said. He looked at her. "The wolf," she said. "You know what you have to do." He closed his eyes, and he shifted. The mask's reaction was immediate. It brightened, fractured, the black lines moving as the form beneath it reshaped. The wolf that came to stand in the council chamber was enormous and black and utterly still, the way very powerful things are still when they are choosing stillness, rather than merely exhibiting it. Garrick had drawn the guards into a defensive arc around the perimeter, not threatening the wolf, but present. She stepped forward. She pulled the knife from the inside of her coat, her mother's knife, the blade she had used 7 years ago to cut silver wire, small and plain and very sharp. This time she had not come alone. Garrick was at her left. Theodan stood at the back of the room. Leora held the second entrance, her arm still bandaged from the day Freya had mistaken being known for being safe. The wolf was watching her with eyes she knew. "Ash," she said. Something in the wolf's posture changed. The tension went somewhere else. She walked toward it slowly. "Do you remember a girl by a river in the early morning with cold hands and terrible bedside manner?" The wolf made a sound she could not describe, not threatening, something else. "She was 17, and she was afraid of the blood," Freya said, "but she stayed. Because you were in pain, and because whatever you were capable of, you had chosen not to use any of it on her." She was close now, close enough to see the mask within the wolf's shifting form. The same silver-black structure, fighting to hold, a shape the wolf no longer fit. "You chose what you were," she said, "long before anyone placed that mask on you." She raised the knife. "Hold still for me, one more time." She struck the center of the mask's binding seam. The reaction was everything the documents had described. Light that was physical, heat she felt in her palm, a sound that was not quite sound, the wolf's entire body absorbing the feedback in a shudder that rolled from head to tail. She was thrown backward and caught before she hit the floor, and when she looked up, the wolf was standing in the center of the room with the remains of the mask scattered at its feet. Isolde, in the corner, was holding her burned left hand with her right. She was watching her son, not Evander. Alaric had set the ring on the table. He sat down. Evander shifted back slowly, the way a person sits down after standing for a very long time. He was on one knee in the center of the chamber, breathing hard, and he looked. She could finally see his whole face, without the mask, without any of it. He looked like a man who had just come back from somewhere very far. She crossed the room. She crouched in front of him. "Well done," she said. He looked up at her. His eyes were exactly the same in the lamplight as they were in wolf form and in the dark. The exhaustion was exactly the same. But something else was in them now that had not been there before. He said, "I would like to sit on the floor for a moment." "You can sit on the floor for as long as you want," she said. In the weeks that followed, things were not simple. Theodan gave formal testimony to the council the next morning. She described in precise terms what the silver had felt, like moving through the mate bond. Her household file was corrected, her name restored. She did not stay. She had spent 4 years building a life in the north and preferred to keep it. But her testimony went on record, and that was enough. Isolde was held pending formal trial. The charges, the creation and weaponization of the mask, the mate bond attacks, years of falsified records, the conspiracy to install Alaric as regent. The letter in her own hand was submitted as evidence. Alaric renounced his claim to the throne before giving his testimony and remained under custody for his part in transporting the mask's materials. He cooperated fully in a way that suggested he had been rehearsing for this moment for some time. Evander's pack authority returned over 10 days. The northern representative told Freya privately he had known something was wrong for years. Isolde was very good, he said, at making the obvious thing seem dangerous. The border treaty required renegotiation. Freya recommended the new terms herself. Her father sent back a letter of such careful diplomatic language it said almost nothing. She recognized it as the version of apology he was capable of. Leora found 11 people whose household files had been falsified. She found Senna's name in a falsified transport manifest, listed as deceased, shipped west under a fictitious identity. The kind of cruelty that only revealed itself if you looked closely. Leora looked closely. Senna came home on a cold morning. Freya did not watch that reunion because it was not hers to watch. Evander held a formal session and read aloud the records of every incident attributed to his curse. He described what had actually happened, the mask's interventions, the years spent inside a story about his own nature written by someone else. He said the silence had been his choice, and choices have consequences even when the original cause belongs to someone else. He stood in the decade that had happened and did not pretend it hadn't. On a morning about 3 weeks after the trial proceedings began, he found her in the garden. She was sitting on the low stone bench near the old herbs, writing in the pale winter sun. He sat down beside her and held something out. A length of silver wire, old, corroded at one end, bent in the shape of a trap's mechanism. She took it. "I found it in a record box," he said. "Trap records from the Southern Territories. A healer submitted a report about finding a wounded wolf near the river." She looked at the wire. She looked at him. "You've had this for how long?" "Since 2 days after the wedding. I wanted to find a time to give it back." "And what are you saying?" He was quiet for a moment. "The first time you found me," he said, "I had nothing to offer except teeth and fear." She waited. "You chose not to use either against me." She looked at him, at his face, fully visible now, with all its exhaustion and its history, and the particular quality of a person who has learned not to expect kindness and is still, stubbornly, hoping for it. "Are you asking me to stay?" she said. "Will you choose a life with me?" he said, before either of us knows what title it will carry?" She turned the piece of wire over in her hands. "I named a wolf after Ash," she said, "and spent 7 years wondering why I couldn't put the memory down. And then I came to a castle in the rain and found out the wolf had spent the same 7 years wearing a mask someone told him he needed." She paused. "Yes, I'll stay." He exhaled. She heard 7 years of held breath in it. She leaned into his shoulder just slightly in the winter sun. His hand came up slowly and held the back of hers, and neither of them said anything else for a long time. The formal bonding was held on a morning in early spring. No council required, no treaty to bind. Garrick was there, Leora was there. Theodan had returned from the north for the ceremony and stood at the edge of the clearing in the forest, not the great hall. Evander stopped and asked. He would always stop and ask, the way he had been shaped by years of being afraid of his own force into a man who would always, before anything, ask. She answered by pulling him close. The mark appeared clean and silver on her skin, and felt like something that had always been true finally being said aloud. They walked back through the forest afterward. The trees were beginning to green. "You should have seen this forest in autumn," she said. "You should have seen this kingdom before I was taught to be afraid of it," he said. She squeezed his hand. He squeezed back. A year later, on a night in early winter, Freya walked the path between the castle and the tree line alone. She walked it deliberately. She did not carry a weapon. She heard it before she turned, heavy and soft and certain. The wolf stepped out from between the trees, black, enormous, with a scar along its ribs that the winter coat did not quite cover. No mask, no silver chains, no one watching from the walls. She looked at it. It looked at her. "You are late," she said. The wolf's great head lowered. It crossed the distance between them in 3 unhurried steps and pressed its forehead against her open palm, exactly as it had done in a forest at dawn 7 years ago, when she was 17 and frightened and didn't yet know what she was going to carry. She put her hand against the familiar scar. She felt him breathing. Then he shifted back, the slow return, the man reassembling from the wolf the way the best things do, without fanfare, without pain, simply choosing. And they stood together in the clearing, and the forest was quiet, and the moon gave them enough light to see by. He offered his arm. She took it. They walked back toward the lights of Blackthorn together, leaving no shadow on the path but their own.